Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of Why We Huddle. Today, we're mixing it up just a little bit because today we have Zack Gugenheim from Why We Huddle Big Ten Football Talk podcast, and he's going to tell us about why he started a Big Ten only podcast and also a little bit of his first love, Ohio State football. And welcome back, everybody. And welcome to the show, Zach. How are you doing today?
Great, man. Thanks so much for having me. And I just want to say major props. You nailed my last name, which not many people do on the first try. So that's well done.
I will admit I just had to take a shot at it. The Heim, I went to law school with a Heim, so I'm like, I'm going to take a guess that's Guggen, but you never know, right?
Yep. Yep. Well, just don't ask Siri about my last name because I mean she just butchers it all the time. So
What'd she say it is?
Gugenheim, it's not right at all.
Oh well. So anyways, welcome to the show. Glad that you could come on, and I know it's going to be a little bit different since you're not like a set school host, but that's what's going to make it a fun little change of pace today. But I do see you have the Ohio State jersey on, so what can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I'm convinced, or at least my mom has told me that from the time I was like 6 months old, she was showing me Ohio State flashcards. And in all seriousness, I was born in Ohio, but we moved to New Jersey pretty early on. I think I was like 3 months old or something. So obviously I don't remember. And at that time, the program that was in Jersey was Rutgers, and they were not good. New Jersey was very much more of a soccer state, a lacrosse state. And so you didn't grow up rooting for Rutgers. And so my mom, who grew up in Ohio, was steeped in Ohio State lore, steeped in the Woody Hayes era, Woody and Bo, the 10-year war. And so she really brought me up into the rivalry, the Ohio State Michigan rivalry, but into the Ohio State fandom. And I paid attention. It wasn't my first love at first. I actually loved baseball. I was a big Ken Griffey Jr. fan, loved the Seattle Mariners. And part of the reason why I didn't gravitate towards Ohio State and college football in like the first 13 years of my life was the 90s and Ohio State losing to Michigan when they had a chance to go to the national championship. 3 times in the 90s, Ohio State was ranked, I believe, in the top 2, and each time a underdog Michigan team took down Ohio State. And so it became so frustrating to watch that I was like, I don't want to watch this stuff. And so I watched baseball, I watched basketball, never really was into football. And honestly, probably the thing that really hooked me into being an Ohio State fan, I already would have said I was a Buckeye. But what really hooked me was when Jim Tressel took over the program. And I'll never forget his interview. And it was on ESPN. It was all over the news. Even in New Jersey, you heard about it, where Jim Tressel at a basketball game halftime, they brought him out to be interviewed. This is January 2001. And he says, and I can state it verbatim, "You will be proud of our young people in the classroom, in the community, and in 310 days in Ann Arbor, Michigan." And I'm like, this dude gets it. And of course, 310 days later, he takes an underdog Ohio State squad with a backup quarterback, Craig Krenzel, to beat the Michigan Wolverines. And I'm like, this is magical to me now. And it wasn't a great season. They went 7-5. They got beat by South Carolina in the Outback Bowl. One of their many losses to an SEC team in a bowl game. But it changed how I viewed college football and Ohio State for the rest of my life. And at that point, I was a super fan. And of course, the next year they have that magical run to win the national championship in 2002, beat what many thought was a dynastic University of Miami team, and it just yeah, I just fell in love with the culture, the rivalry. We'd go back once a year for an Ohio State game, and typically it was a team that they beat up. They would beat up on like San Jose State or a homecoming game of some sorts. But I just fell in love with it. And then probably there are two games in particular that are probably the biggest highlights to me that really forged my love. One was actually in a loss. I got to go. I was in college, and I got a ticket in the nosebleeds for $140 to see Vince Young and the Texas Longhorns come to Columbus, and it was probably the most NFL talent I've ever seen in a game. You know, you had Vince Young, you had Michael Huff, Selvin Young. Trying to think, Jamal Charles was in that game. AJ Hawk, Bobby Carpenter, Santonio Holmes, who's a Super Bowl MVP. I mean, all these stars. Obviously, Troy Smith, who was a Heisman winner, and they lose that game in heartbreaking fashion, but it was it was nuts. Just a nuts atmosphere. Still the best game I've ever been to in Ohio Stadium. And then on my 30th birthday in 2016, I saw the Ohio State Michigan game, the double overtime game, 2 versus 3. Curtis Samuel comes in with two ridiculous plays. The last one being the game winning touchdown. I counted my potential heart attacks at about 5 in that game, and somehow I'm still alive. But it was one of the most uh, fun games. Well, it was fun after the fact. That I've ever been a part of. And so those are, I think, some of the highlights of the fandom. But yeah, a lot of it really, probably the point where I was okay. I'm a fan for life is the Jim Tressel speech, and then what he accomplished that first year.
Awesome. Now, who would be some of your favorite players that you've seen for the Buckeyes?
Oh man. So recently, I was a big Chris Olave fan. He's this 3-star kid out of California. He shouldn't have been a 3-star, but he was lightly recruited. But I loved his attitude, the way he played. He wasn't super flashy. He was just a ridiculous route runner. Broke the career touchdown record, and you never think that he would be the guy. You think Marvin Harrison or Garrett Wilson but he's the guy that broke the career receiving touchdown record. So he's one of my favorites. AJ Hawk was another one. The dude just brought it game in and game out. Loved him. JT Barrett, with all of his flaws, I loved the leader he was. Um, I just really appreciated his leadership, the way he led the team even when he went down with injury. Um, I'm trying to think if there's any younger guys or older guys that I can remember. Eddie George was one of those stalwarts that I remember in the '90s as well, and so a lot of those, yeah, I love a lot of the older players in the 2000s. And were just tough, hard nosed football players. AJ Hawk, Bobby Carpenter, Chris Gamble, who was a two-way player for us. Those are probably some of my favorites. James Laurinaitis, who's now on staff with the Buckeyes, he's the linebackers coach. So yeah, I think it's funny. I could go across the board. I loved the guys who stayed for multiple years that really gave a lot to the university. It's another reason why I like Chris Olave. Could have left after his junior year and he stayed for his senior year. James Laurinaitis, AJ Hawk, same way. Like they stayed for their senior year and really brought a lot their senior year. So yeah, just those are the guys I really think of.
Awesome, awesome. So, an Ohio State guy growing up in New Jersey, what ends up, and of course, probably growing up, Rutgers was not Big Ten, they were Big East. What makes you start a Big Ten podcast?
Yeah, so a lot of it, my fandom of the Big Ten as a whole starts with the team that you represent, Daniel. And it was a fateful night. I'm not gonna. I don't know the exact date. I've tried to block it out a bit, but in January of 2007, there was great hope for Ohio State to win another national championship, and instead they kind of became a laughing stock because of the Chris Leak, Tim Tebow, and the Florida Gators, and a young coach by the name of Urban Meyer, who
Yeah,
he wasn't that important to either of our fan bases.
not at all.
Um, but that was a pivotal time for the Big Ten Conference because I think a lot of people thought it should have been Ohio State, Michigan after that 1-2 game in 2006. It was so close. 42-39 was the final score. And instead, Florida jumped Michigan, which I rightly thought that should have happened. I thought Florida was the better team. Obviously, they proved it. But I think what started at that on that day, that combined with the Rose Bowl, where USC really took control over Michigan in that game, was the narrative that the Big Ten was this slow, plodding conference and the SEC was the elite. And no doubt about it, the SEC was was a the predominant conference, the predominant power. And I would argue that from a competitive standpoint, I think top to bottom, the SEC is still a little better than the Big Ten. Now the media, I think the media deals, I think NIL is really starting to even that out. But that was a turning point because now all of a sudden Ohio State was tied to the success of a conference. And you saw it, you heard about it all the time that Ohio State was being maligned even before the 2007 national championship game. They were saying they didn't even belong there, despite the fact that the team they were playing was an LSU team that had two losses. Um, More and more, it became, well, does their record really matter because they play in the Big Ten? Big Ten teams are slow. Big Ten teams are not as athletic. If you were good, you were an SEC like team, which I just felt like, no, Ohio State's Ohio State. They don't need to be an SEC like team. And so there was this reality for me, and I think other Ohio State fans felt this way too, was that in many ways the Big Ten's perception was starting to weigh down Ohio State. And I hated, especially as I got older, I really hated the way that the media talked about the Big Ten. So like it was one thing to bring up, I don't know if the Big Ten is as good top to bottom. I don't know if the top teams are as good as the top teams in the SEC. I thought that was fair commentary, but it didn't feel like it was just it felt over the top. You brought in guys like Mark May, like uh Desmond Howard, who, he is certainly not a favored son of ours.
Not
Um,
at all.
but you had these college game day hosts who really just felt like caricatures, who were less educated and more just spouted off popular opinions for ratings. And the best way to get ratings is to tick off Ohio State fans, right? Because we're sensitive and we're
Or
we're
Florida fans.
yeah, yeah. So, get fan bases outraged. And so I think I really hated the narrative around Big Ten, the Big Ten conference. And so that made me become more of a fan of each of the teams. Like I started tracking more of these conference teams like Wisconsin and Iowa. And, anytime that they'd take out a Big Ten or an SEC team or a team from the South, I'd inwardly, pump my fist because I'm like, yeah, like that matters for our perception if we want to make national highlights, right? And The way I'd put it is it felt like for a long time the Big Ten was punching up. Like we needed to get back up to where the SEC and maybe some key ACC teams like um, Florida State and Clemson were. And for about 2007 to 2013, it just kind of felt like we're just punching up, we're punching up, we're punching up. And then obviously 2014, Ohio State wins the national championship. They beat Alabama. But also, what was really big for the conference perception was that Michigan State beat Baylor and Wisconsin beat Auburn in very key bowl games. And I think a lot of people had the same narrative up until that point. But then Ohio State beats Bama and Oregon in marquee matchups. Michigan State beats a really good Baylor team who many people thought Baylor should have been in the playoff over Ohio State. And then you have Wisconsin, who Ohio State drubbed in the Big Ten championship game. And Melvin Gordon goes like for 250 on a pretty good Auburn defense. And I think the narrative started to turn a little bit. You stopped hearing the words SEC like. And I think moving into why I started a podcast or how I became a fan of the conference, having been a fan in those years really forged a love for these other teams because you saw that they were really struggling and punching up as well. Teams like Northwestern, who from a recruiting perspective have no business winning 10 wins in a season. And yet, they're doing that and beating Mississippi State in a bowl game. And you're like, how is Northwestern doing this with like MAC level recruits? I don't understand. But it was really fun to see them succeed, for them to make a couple Big Ten championship games, for Rutgers for what they're doing right now, how they've become more relevant, beating Miami this past year in a bowl game, Michigan State being a player for a little bit, making a playoff, and even Michigan, despite the fact that, I'd rather never celebrate Michigan, but them winning a national championship, it's been fun to see these different programs really rise up and to see their traditions, to see, to get excited about the rivalry games. There's I was just talking with the Rajiv from the Bucky Report. We're talking about, and not just him, but Kurt from Sky U Pod, the Minnesota podcast, and the College Huddle. But the Battle of the Axe is probably the coolest rivalry trophy in the country because you're playing for an axe, and it's steeped in tradition, and that's what college football is all about. In my mind, it's the rivalries, it's the fan bases, it's the traditions, and the Big Ten is so rich with it. And sometimes you miss that when you're just talking about, well, they're not really that good. They're not the SEC. They're not, you miss all that. And I think I just really grew to love that the program's getting better, but also the rivalries and how they're steeped in this deep tradition, deep hatred between fan bases. So that's probably big. My other, I'll just share one other thought, and then you can transition us. But I did college ministry at Penn State for 4 years, and I was there during the Sandusky scandal, and that was, I think, another part of where I really grew to appreciate the Penn State football culture. And, there were things that I didn't like about it, for sure. And that's probably another story for another time with Paterno and Sandusky and all that stuff. But to understand what the football team means to the community, and it was just really, really, it was a great time for me to get to pour into people, because that was a really tough time, 2011, 2012, for everybody involved in that situation. It was really a communal thing. But then to see how football really did play a part in the healing process of that, I thought it was a really fun thing to be a part of. And so I've gotten to see it from a lot of different angles, from the fan perspective, from loving a community, And then obviously being an Ohio State fan.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's really good to hear, and also interesting that you were at Penn State when perhaps the biggest thing out of Penn State in what 30 years went down.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, but
Yeah.
getting to see a different part of the Big Ten that way, which you know, I don't know if I'd want to be in your shoes when that happened, because I'm sure there's a lot of work to be done on your end. It sounds like, as a you know campus pastor.
Yeah, it was it's neat. It was definitely hard, but I still there was one night I still remember getting to sit with a number of students and just pray over the campus with them. And it was more than football. It was a
Right.
community that was really hurting. And um yeah, so and I think that's we can talk football all day long, and that's my outlet, right? And we'll talk about that later. But it's about people, it's about community, and
Yes.
obviously I'm trying to help them get to something even better than football, which is the Lord. But um that's part of it, is getting to be in community and getting to enjoy these things with people, and probably Penn State more than even Ohio State I've gotten to do that with.
Yeah, and that's one thing we've talked about on multiple episodes of this podcast is community, and things bigger than football, and how it can also help with the healing process. Like, we have talked with Virginia Tech about how,
Mhm.
after the shootings happen on Virginia Tech, and how they have their run every year. And there's a run every year in Oklahoma State, in Stillwater, that actually Calvin talked about how his family actually was the people who organized that for a tragedy out
Mm.
there. And
Yeah.
it's just so, one thing about the show is seeing the threads and the hosts, and just seeing the cool ways that college football has almost helped communities after tragedies, in different places, and realizing, even though, our football culture may be a little bit different, it's cool to see a lot of the same things in the good that comes out, around the nation, and the different fan bases and ways we can connect through that. So, very cool.
Mhm. Yep, yep.
So let's go and start talking about the Big Ten podcast, or Big Ten football talk podcast. My bad, I left it a little short.
That's all right, that's all right. Yeah, so the way I can start with how we started it, or how I started it. Really, it was, I'm a campus missionary. I have the best job in the world. Like, I really do. I get to meet with students one on one. We open the Bible together. We pray together. We learn how to follow Jesus together. Like, that's my job, and it's the best job in the world. And you really walk through hard stuff with people. And I think around COVID, I had been talking to different counselors and friends, and I was realizing I have got to find healthy outlets for me outside of ministry, and not just to watch football, but like to have a project or to have some sort of fun thing. And so it actually started before this. A friend of mine at church works at a Christian radio station, and they would every Friday night do high school football. They would do radio broadcasting, and in college, I went to this small liberal arts school, Division 3, where I learned a little bit about how to do radio. And so I had told that to my friend. His name's Don Castelline. And Don was like, "You should do this with us." And so I did a few games. I'd be on sidelines, or I'd do color, and just fell in love with it. I was like, yeah, like I would never want to do this for my full time job, because I really do love what I do. But for a hobby, yeah, this is really fun. So that was kind of my starting to think, oh yeah, like talking about football, it is really therapeutic for me in a way. And then over COVID, a friend of mine and I, we started tossing around the idea of starting a podcast. It was really originally going to be a better version of Undisputed or First Take, one of those debate shows.
Right.
Is we were going to take a topic and we are going to debate, but we were going to try to be more reasonable and charitable because everybody knows Skip and Stephen A are not.
Yep.
So no disrespect to them, but that's
Yeah.
if you know, you
It's
know.
the show.
If
Yeah.
yeah, if you know, you know. And between our schedules, it just like we got one episode recorded, and I thought it was a good episode, but we never found like a good rhythm and time, and so we're just like, I just don't know if this is gonna work. So I had created an account on Anchor, and I was toying around one day. It was still COVID season. It was like summer of 2021. Fans were getting back into the stands for the first time uh, in regular season football games. And I was like, I'm really excited for football to come back.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna, I'm gonna put something out there. Illinois and Nebraska were playing, and I was like, I like talking about these teams. Brett Bielema's coming back. I think Scott Frost is going to get fired soon. Like, let's just talk about this game and see what happens. And I remember I very hastily put together a soundtrack and recorded for like 20-25 minutes my pilot episode, and on it I say Illinois is going to beat Nebraska and here are my reasons why, and so excited that we're going to hear cheers and all that stuff. It probably nonsense for most of it. But I picked the right winner. And actually, I think I was like 3 points within the score. Like it was kind of eerie how close it was. And I like looked up the statistics of who listened to it. I'm like, all right, my mom's going to listen, and like one other rando is going to listen. My wife's not even going to listen. Like
Yeah.
that's not how she finds rest, is listening to me talk about football. Uh, so like, I'm thinking like, all right, two people are going to listen to it. And there was over 50 people that listened to it. And one of my coworkers, uh, his dad, if you're listening, I love you. Um, but Jim Ebersol, he like texted me. He's like, "This was incredible. You got to do this again." None of that. And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, and so I did another episode, and like after a while, like people from all different states started emailing me, and they would challenge my takes, or they would be like, "Oh man, like this is so great. Like, thanks for your analysis." And I was like people from Illinois and Wisconsin. I'm like, I'm in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, talking about Big Ten schools, and they're finding my podcast. And I was like, this is kind of cool. And getting to engage with Illinois fans and all these different fans from all walks of life. And it just became one of these things where I'm like, I I I never want to just do a hobby. Like I want to do a hobby where I can connect with people that I think God can use me to talk about the gospel, but also to have fun and to do like to really be with people. And all of a sudden I was realizing I have this opportunity to engage with all these different people. And so that's what I started doing. And now we're, I think, 180 episodes strong on Spotify. And I just really started getting YouTube kind of figured out. For a while, I was like, we're just not going to touch YouTube. Um, and it's been fun. Like our listenership has quadrupled in the past, or our subscribers have quadrupled in like a month or 2 months. Now that's not saying much because it was like 30, but it's like, wow, like people are tuning in and they want to hear. In fact, a Rutgers fan just tuned into our Rutgers episode. I was interviewing Larry Crane from Night Watch, who's also on the College Huddle, and his response to our episode was, "It's the best Rutgers content he's heard all summer." And I'm like, "That's awesome!" Like,
Yeah.
and it's an opportunity to engage and to connect. And so I really have really enjoyed it, and what's been amazing is as I got into this is when conference expansion has really come into play. And so I remember I think it was a day or two before my coworker and good friend's wedding. All of a sudden, I just get breaking news: USC and UCLA are joining the Big Ten, and I'm like, I gotta put out an episode right now. I gotta do this now. And but it's like it's been a really exciting time
Yes.
for the Big Ten and Michigan, Michigan winning the national championship, Michigan being in potential trouble for their national championship. Like there's a lot of fun stories that are out there. I think seeing Oregon and Washington join has been really, really fun. I think seeing Kurt Signetti take over at Indiana, what Greg Schiano is doing at Rutgers, what David Braun, uh, the year he had at Northwestern this past year, like there's no rhyme or reason why they should have gone 8-5. Like there's just none. And yet for some reason, like he just had magic there last year. And those stories are so fun to cover.
For sure. And I'm sure we'll get into a lot or a little bit later, but we don't talk too much current stuff on here, but I would want to hear your takes on expansion just while I have you, as well as the rumored expansion potentially coming with Florida State.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'll start with Florida State. I think it's very clear that the ACC's days are most likely numbered. There are always scenarios where we can be proven wrong. Um,
Right.
that being said, outside of Notre Dame being like, you know what, we're going to join the ACC and we're going to bring our listenership, and our viewership and our sponsorships with it to bolster the league. I just don't see. I don't see a future for the conference if Florida State and Clemson leave, and that's like all the smoke is pointing to that. And I really do think that at some point, much to my chagrin, is a two conference like model where you have a north by northwest and a southeast conference. Like I think that's more and more where we're headed. And I know we don't like it. Like I think you lose some of the tradition. Certainly you lose a lot of the tradition. But I think because of the I mean, let's just be real. The SEC and the Big 10 have been much better managed products.
Yes.
And I think the one thing people don't understand about the Big Ten was even though they were at their worst back in 2007 and 8 and 9, Jim Delaney was playing chess where everybody else except the SEC was playing checkers. Because everybody, wondered like why he was making a network like the Big Ten network. Why was he getting Rutgers and Maryland and not other quote unquote power programs? What he was doing is securing the best television networks for the most revenue. And he really set the Big Ten up well. You have research institutions that are secured that now are also bringing in buku bucks from an athletic perspective and from a media perspective. And so, despite the fact that they were the worst, at times the worst athletic conference, maybe outside of the Big East, they were securing themselves financially to the point where now they are, if they're not the top conference, they're 1B to the SEC's 1A. And compare that to the Big 12, compare that to the ACC. Clearly, the Pac 12 has been decimated. And so I think the future is we're going to see more and more of a delineation, I think, between the SEC and the Big 10. And I think maybe there's going to be another tier below that might, instead of FCS and FBS, you might have FBS and then a mid tier between them and FCS. I don't know how that's going to play out. Um, in in terms of expansion in general, it makes for a lot of interesting scenarios, right? Because Georgia, who I know you, I'm sure, are not exactly a fan of. Um, Georgia is, I think, the presumptive favorite, or at least one of the presumptive favorites. Their schedule is obscene. Like it is a awful schedule. I think they go to Texas, they go to Alabama, they play Clemson in the non-conference. Like I think there's a real shot they're 9-3, and like, do they make the playoff at 9-3? Do they make? And that's crazy to say in a 12-team world, but it's a rough schedule. And I think that as I've looked at both the SEC and Big Ten different schedules, that's, I think, the takeaway I have with expansion is there's a lot of teams. Like, I think everybody's kind of assuming that the top four seeds are going to have 12, like, are going to be undefeated or at worst 11-1. I think there's a real scenario where you have an SEC champion at 10-2, a Big
Yeah.
Ten champion at 10-2. Like, people are not accounting for the travel. Like, everybody's saying Oregon might win the Big Ten, and I think they have a real shot, but they've got to travel across the country over and back and over and back. Like, a friend of mine over at Boiler Express, he made the point that Oregon has to play Ross-Ade at night. That's not easy. Regardless of what you think about Purdue, it's not easy for them, or it's not easy for anybody to play Ross-Ade. And Purdue might go 4-8, and they have a much better roster than a year ago. And that I think that speaks to the competitive nature of these conferences now.
Right.
Is I think you have a lot more, like, you're adding great conference teams and programs, both on the SEC and the Big Ten, and the lower teams are starting to level up. Like Missouri is a is
Yes.
a is a great example, right? Like Missouri just, I mean, I don't, again, games I don't want to relive, the Cotton Bowl this past year. But Missouri's, I think, is going to be a playoff team this year. And I very well think they could get into the SEC championship game. So these other teams that you would think are mid tier, they're starting to rise up, and then scheduling really matters.
Yes.
Iowa could go 11-1. Iowa could go 11-1, not easily, but like there's a real pathway there. There's a real pathway for Rutgers to go 10-2. I'm not saying that'll happen, but there's a world out there where we talked about this on the Big Ten huddle a few weeks ago. You have Iowa and Rutgers as your Big Ten championship game, and the CBS TV execs are pulling their hair out because they're like, we thought it was going to be Ohio State, Oregon, and it's Iowa, Rutgers. What are we doing? But like, I think that's part of this world we live in now, is that expansion creates often really difficult schedules, particularly for the big boys, because who do we want to see? We want to see the big boys play each other. And then you see, Iowa and Rutgers and other teams, they don't have the same schedules. I think Missouri, if I remember correctly, I don't think Missouri has a daunting schedule. Certainly
No.
not to the level
Not
of, like,
comparative. Not comparative to like a Florida or Georgia at all. At all.
right.
They somehow lucked out in getting the at least two of the three, what I would say, bottom of the SEC for this year, and I could be proven wrong, and that's uh, Mississippi State, Vandy, and South Carolina. Granted, we may end up there by the end, but not for lack of a hard schedule, as we avoid Vandy and South Carolina and go on the road to Mississippi State. So we nail one of the three, but
Yeah,
also
you're on the
encounter.
road.
Yep. But also
Do you,
encounter Georgia and Texas back to back. So, woo-hoo.
back to back?
Yep.
Oh,
One Georgia and Jacksonville, and then we head to Austin the next week.
schedule
Yep.
makers love the Gators this year. Man,
Yeah.
that is rough. Do you guys play Bama too?
We don't play Bama. First half is decently manageable. Like,
Mm.
but unfortunately, when you hit that back half, we have a bye. Then we have Georgia away at Austin, home against LSU, who I think takes a drop from last year. That doesn't mean that they're going to be bad, but when you
Yeah.
lose, a Heisman Trophy quarterback and 2 first-round receivers, it's at least a step back at home. But then we have Ole Miss, who had 11 wins last year and pretty much only leveled up, except for losing, a few like Jenkins to you guys, and then
Yeah.
finished with a trip to Florida State, our last 5 games in 5 weeks. So,
That's rough. Well, and you start with Miami, who's
yeah.
not going to be a slouch.
Oh, yeah.
Although, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there aren't many that are going to be slouches, but at least in the first half, there's no teams that won more than 8 games last year, and 6 of the first 7 only won 7. So, although we are 5-7, it's at least somewhere in that range of okay, a field goal here, is probably the difference, or fumble there. So it's something that you expect, maybe 2-3 game jump in a year 3 with a six
Mhm.
year quarterback, but don't want to get too much into the current stuff for sure.
Yeah. It's a hard schedule, and
Yes,
Missouri does not have one.
right.
Yeah.
Of course, our friends over at Woodswater, Mizzou will probably try and deny that, but we love Skeeter. He was on not too long ago, uh, for sure. But yeah, uh, definitely not what you see from some of these teams in the Big Ten or the SEC.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the my biggest, like, I was just starting to do my my run through of what I think records are going to be in the Big Ten. Actually, I've got it right here, which it's blurred out on my screen. But um I'm trying, like, this is, I think, easily the hardest. Like, I did it a once over, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to do at least one more and maybe two more, because I just sat there and I'm like, do I really think this team's gonna go 5-7?
Yeah.
And I think actually the team one of the teams that I have Wisconsin right now, in my rough draft at 6-6, and I'm like, I don't think Wisconsin's a 6-6 team. I think they're better than that. But then I look at their schedule. You know, they play Alabama in Madison. They play at USC. They play Purdue at home. They play at Rutgers. They play at Northwestern. They play Penn State. They play at Iowa. And then they play Oregon, at Nebraska, and Minnesota. And I'm like, I can make a case for them winning a lot of those games, and I can make a case for them losing all of those games. Maybe except a couple. And I'm like, that's hard. Like, especially the Big Ten West, who I think a lot of people, the Big Ten West was certainly not the good division for the Big Ten.
No.
Um, but like, there were years where that you had really good teams in those divisions, and they proved it. But you look at the schedules now compared to a year ago, and you're like, oh, they don't get, they except for a couple, Iowa being one of them. There's no room for error for them anymore. And Wisconsin's a really good example of that. Maryland, and now they're an East, former East team, but like Maryland has a pretty tough schedule. Minnesota, who I think they're going to be improved this year. They, I mean, I'm like, man, do they get bowl eligible this year? I don't know. So it's an interesting. There's interesting storylines everywhere you
Yeah.
go, and I think even to your point about Florida, like, Florida would have the advantage of having at least Vandy and others to kind of pad the schedule, and that's not there anymore.
Nope.
And I think that's one of the things about expansion that is really intriguing to me is, how does it affect the boys up top? Do we get more upsets? And also, like, how do the maybe mid to lower teams handle a more rigorous schedule?
Yep. And we'll see how that all works out for sure. Because you never know. But in a way, it's going to give us a lot more opportunity to, just
Hmm.
see how it turns out. It's going to be like, hey, no one can say you didn't get an opportunity, but I think strength of schedule will be factored in a lot more. Of course, I'm going to upset our friends at the Big 12, but if I'm looking at, yeah, let's just look at the FSU scenario from last year. 13-0 team gets left out. Obviously, with 12, 12 playoff spots, not going to happen to a conference champion. That's not going to happen again. Of course, it
Yep.
happened the last year. But uh, when we're talking about a Big Ten who added, at least three powerhouse schools in UCLA, has been up and down. There are times they're powerhouse, times where they've just been okay. Um, and then we add two teams in the SEC, two teams that were 10 plus wins last year, I believe, in Oklahoma and Texas. I mean,
Hmm.
Texas was in the playoffs.
Yep.
With these expansions and these harder schedules, if it comes down to here's an 11-1 Big 12 team or a 10-2 SEC or Big 10 team, it's like, what do the schedules look like? Now, I could be wrong. We could go and see a ridiculous Big 12. There are some programs I think will be great, and others that they'll be like, but if you're talking about Georgia's schedule, for example, let's say that 10-2 is Georgia, you're talking they went on the road to Alabama, you know, Austin. What how are you gonna say no to that for a team whose
Yep.
biggest win might be in Orlando over UCF? And that's not a knock on the bounce house. That's just a comparatively we're gonna do. But it's definitely an interesting conversation that I would love to have with you sometime, either on Big Ten Huddle or we'll figure out a time. Maybe we'll go on the College Huddle National Show and we
Mm.
can play these fun games. We'll
Yeah,
talk to JR and the guys, see if that can happen.
that'd be
But
good. That'd be a fun
with
show.
for sure. Now, with that said, where can we find you?
Yeah. So if you want to look me up uh, on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Big Ten Football Talk. I think actually the handle is at Zack Gugenheim is the Twitter handle, but it's Big Ten Football Talk is the name of the account. Same thing with Instagram. I'm not posting a lot there right now, but you can follow me there. And then Spotify, Apple is where you can get audio podcasts. And then, and again, it's just Big Ten Football Talk. You can follow on Apple. You can be a follower on Spotify. And then on YouTube, our YouTube channel, definitely come over and subscribe there. We'd love to have you. And there we're putting the podcasts out, but then I'm also trying to splice together some shorter videos out of those podcasts so that if you have a shorter attention span, they're more digestible videos. And so, but yeah, so that's kind of been a part. And we, at least during the off season, Monday mornings is kind of when we release. Uh, I don't know what we're gonna do in the fall because I the way my format's probably gonna change a little bit, but yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. And before we get out of here, is there anything that you just would like to share, whether it's about your podcast, whatever? Any last message you have for our listeners?
Um, well, one, definitely come and check out our podcast. And Daniel, I just want to say thanks for having me. It's been a real joy to come up here and talk ball and talk about fandom. It's a real joy.
Oh yeah, and thank you for coming on. Like, it's great to do this and meet people, and it's also great talking to people like yourselves who have similar stories to mine, but located in different areas of the country, and just saying how much we have in common. Which, as you're talking about the SEC, without saying it, there's a lot of SEC bias at times out there, and I sit there, I'm like, hey, it happens, but it's great always hearing the perspectives of that, and also seeing you as like, okay, well, conference perception matters. What can we see with the Big Ten getting better? And that's an amazing perspective that you have. So thank you for coming on, and definitely anyone listening, be sure to check out Big Ten Football Talk, and also check out all the podcasts here at the College Huddle. Uh, anything, I'm gonna give you the offer one more time. Any other thing you want to throw out there?
Just for all you guys listening, just thank you guys, and God bless to all of you.
Yes. And as Zach said, thanks everyone for listening and discovering why we huddle.